The following is paid advertisement and does not reflect the opinions of this station. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. The information presented in this program is general and is not intended to be legal advice and should not be relied upon or used without consulting a lawyer to consider your specific circumstances.
Questions about law, stories from the courtroom, cases that might impact your life. It's time for Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn from Cook, Barkat, Ponder, and Wolves. Find them at cbpw-law.com. Here's Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn.
Good morning and welcome back to Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we ask you to take a second look at the world of personal injury litigation. Alongside Dan Grimm, I'm Matt Glenn, and Dan, we've got a guest today. Who'd you bring us this week?
We have Bill Hampton. Bill, thank you for being here today.
Hey, glad to be here.
Hey, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I have a background in major crash investigation. Been doing it for a long, long time. Started my crash investigation about 45 years ago.
Wow.
And did that and really developed it once I became a member with the Missouri State Highway Patrol and took some additional schooling there and became a member of their accident reconstruction program.
Wow.
So yeah, tell the folks, accident reconstruction, how is that different from a typical police report after an accident?
Well, usually an accident reconstruction is used when there are fatalities involved in a crash, or there may be felony criminal charges involved in a crash. Mm-hmm. And at that time, that they'll seek out an accident reconstructionist.
Yeah. And what's the process then for doing a reconstruction?
Well, usually you start with the initial accident investigation and accident investigator. You'll gain as much information as possible from them. And then you start looking at every aspect of the crash scene, the people involved, the vehicles involved. You get into the history of the people, the mechanical issues prior to the crash. You're looking at a lot of things, not only from the crash, but even leading up to the crash.
Mm-hmm. And when you're doing that type of accident reconstruction, that's going to be a much longer report than a typical accident report.
It is. It varies, but where just a simple crash report's usually 4 or 5 pages long. Mm-hmm. A reconstruction report may be 50 to 100 pages long, detailing all the information from your investigation.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, is there a certain type of schooling you have to go to be able to do accident reconstructions?
Well, usually there's 2 paths to do this. Mine, I took the path of being involved in law enforcement and advanced accident investigation. The Missouri State Highway Patrol has extensive accident investigation for all troopers, but they also have what they call on-scene schools, advanced schools, and accident reconstruction schools. And then you continually update yourself, going to additional schools as just refreshers. New technology becomes available, and you have to make sure that you're schooled in that technology and understanding of the crash investigation.
Yeah. Do you know how to fly a drone?
Yes.
Things you never thought you would do reconstructing an accident, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Playing with computers and vehicles, doing things of that nature. Yeah, years ago, never crossed my mind.
Yeah, I've seen you and others like you work, and it always dawns on me you really need an 11-year-old intern to explain all the technology to you sometimes.
It helps.
Yes. It certainly doesn't hurt.
And things you're looking for in crashes is the vehicle itself, where the impact occurred. Can you figure out the speeds of the crash that were involved, the vehicles involved?
Well, you're going to make numerous speed considerations by the evidence at the scene, marks on the roadway, whether it's skid marks, scuff marks, they call them critical scuff marks. You're going to look at that. You will consider witness statements. You will look at the vehicle itself on the equipment, see how it was equipped. Most vehicles now, really GM started it in the 90s, where they record and retain certain information. Now, as of 2012, all vehicles sold in the United States has to have the capability to maintain just certain information from the crash. And so all the manufacturers are doing that now. Chrysler started it about 2005. Ford started about 98, 99. Those are just estimates. But 90% of the vehicles are equipped with what they call a Bosch CDR system, which records the vehicle from certain crashes. And then also there's other vehicles such as Hyundai and Kia that have their own systems.
So how do you go about getting this data, this information that's being recorded in the vehicles?
Well, there's a couple different ways to get it. What most of us recognize on our vehicles now, you have a plug-in underneath the dash. It's called the DLC, Direct Link Connection. And hopefully you can use that. But unfortunately, due to the seriousness of these crashes, sometimes those are destroyed. So in the vehicle, there's various modules. And you have to access these modules to obtain that information, and you have to have specific hardware to do that and also certain computer programs to do that.
And our firm represents people that are involved in serious motor vehicle crashes all the time. And so when something like that happens, how important it is for us to get a hold of somebody like you as soon as we find out about someone being injured or a crash occurring?
Well, when you want that information, the sooner the better. There's always a problem where that vehicle can be sold, it can be removed. In some cases, it can be overridden if the vehicle is still operable. So it's critical to get on to it as soon as possible.
Yeah, how long does that data typically last in a vehicle?
Well, it can last just from a short time, depending on what happens with that vehicle, or it can be forever. I've taken vehicles or the modules out of salvage yards, removed them from the vehicle, and maybe the crash happened 3-4 years ago, and I was still able to get information to the specific crash from that module.
Nice. But other times it gets erased.
It can be overridden, yes.
Yeah.
And what kind of information are you looking for? When you download the data, you're looking for what exactly?
Well, we're looking, the most common thing is speed, braking. We're looking at RPMs. We're looking at the newer ones have steering input, which is really helpful.
What's that steering input? What's that do?
It tells us if the operator was steering the vehicle straight or going to the left or going to the right. Input from the driver. The newer systems are also not only just braking, but braking pressure. You're looking at RPMs of the vehicle, so acceleration, or if the RPMs are steady, and just everything that the driver's doing up to the impact of the crash. Most of these programs go back pre-crash data, just 5 seconds, but there are some that go back longer. And that doesn't sound like much, but it can be a good distance, especially if you're traveling at high speeds. You just convert everything to feet per second. So say on the interstate, if you're traveling 70, that's 102 feet per second, basically. So at 5 seconds, you're looking at over 500 feet back.
That's almost 2 football fields.
Yeah, it is, yes.
That's a fair amount of distance to travel. We're talking with Bill Hampton today. He is an accident reconstructionist and commercial vehicle regulation expert as well. How long were you on the police force?
I was with the Highway Patrol a little bit over 13 years.
Okay.
And then I started my own private business, and I've been doing this privately for 31 years.
Okay. And one of the things I know we've talked to you about in the past is your work on commercial vehicles. What defines a commercial vehicle?
Well, there's a few different things that define a commercial motor vehicle. There's a difference between if you're operating interstate or if you're operating within the state, which is intrastate. But like where we are here in Cape Girardeau, an interstate vehicle, anything over 10,001 pound, and it's used commercially, is a commercial motor vehicle. If you're operating intrastate, it's basically anything over 26,000. There are some other exceptions if you're hauling hazardous material, certain number of passengers, if it's a van or bus, things of that nature.
And those are, anytime a vehicle goes from state to state and it weighs more than, you said, 10,000 pounds?
Yes.
Then is that what then subjects it to federal regulations?
Yes, if it's being operated commercially, that's correct.
Okay. Now, so it's not just tractor trailers, semi-trucks. It can be...
No, a good example would be say an F-250 or a 3/4 ton, any model pickup, GM, whatever. And basically, they usually have a gross vehicle weight rating around 9,000 pounds. So if you hook up a trailer and you're hauling anything, you're going to be over 10,000, and you are a regulated vehicle.
Right.
And some of the larger vans are the same way.
And by vans, it could be even like box trucks.
Yes, a step-side van, box truck. Doesn't have to be a semi-tractor trailer. Just a lot of other vehicles are regulated.
And by being regulated, what extra responsibilities does that call upon the driver?
Well, the driver, once they start operating commercial motor vehicles, on most occasions, and again, there are some exceptions, farmers, firemen, a few other people, they have to have a commercial driver's license beyond the regular license to operate the class of vehicle that they're operating.
And how does one go about getting a commercial driver's license?
There's a couple different ways you can do that. Some companies train their own people. There's truck driving schools that you'll see. There's a commercial motor vehicle or commercial driver's license manual, and there's specific information in that manual that the person I have to test with that manual as far as a written test and also a driving test. And again, for the class of vehicle that they're operating.
To sit for that test, do you have to take a truck driving school?
You do not, but you have to have training to get to that point.
Okay. You'd have to be taught at least how to drive the vehicle.
Yes, and there are regulations that our federal and the state of Missouri has adopted for anything over 26,000 that states that the motor carrier who is utilizing the driver, and that could be the driver themselves if it's just one vehicle, or if it's 10,000 vehicles, then the statutes require you to provide that driver training in the safe operation of a commercial vehicle and how to follow all the regulations that are outlined.
And there certainly are a lot of them, and they play into a lot of the claims if you're involved in an accident with a commercial vehicle. That's going to do it for our first segment. We'll be back in a few moments with Bill Hampton to talk about federal regulations, commercial vehicles, and how they impact your lawsuit.
Cook, Marquette, Ponder, and Walls are very proud of the results they obtain for their clients, but you should know that past results afford no guarantee of future results, that every case is different and must be judged on its own merits, and that the choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. And now, back to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn.
And welcome back to segment 2 of Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we ask you to take a second look at the world of personal injury litigation. You can contact the show at 573-708-7105. Leave us a message, get us a question, we'll get you on the air. Alongside Dan Grimm, I'm Matt Glenn. We're joined today by accident reconstructionist and federal DOT expert, Bill Hampton. Bill, before the break, we were talking about how a driver gets trained to drive commercial vehicles, and it's really the employers that do most of that training. Is that right?
That's correct. There are thousands and thousands of trucking companies out there, and really most of the trucking companies try and do a good job in what we call qualifying their drivers, and that training is part of that. But unfortunately, there are some that don't do that, and then occasionally you have that human error that's involved also.
And for every driver that one of these trucking companies employs, they have to maintain a driver qualifications file that really starts when they get hired. Is that right?
It is. They begin developing that file when they're hired, and you're actually looking at that file to see if that driver will be qualified to hire. And usually the first thing they'll do is have that driver fill out an application. And then they're required to do a background investigation on that driver's application and their previous employment history. They'll look into their driving capabilities, the type of vehicles they previously operated. They're going to look at their accident history, their driving record. They're going to look at their drug and alcohol testing history. And they have to do all that. It's outlined in the regulations.
Yeah, and they also have to go through medical screening of some kind, too.
They do. There's a stringent physical examination program, and each driver has to be able to pass that examination for a commercial driver.
And they do this in large part because these drivers are going to be driving vehicles that can weigh up to how much?
Well, most of the time, they want to get that load at 80,000 pounds because as a shipper, that's the person that you're carrying that freight for. If you're going to pay somebody, you want to get as much freight as you can on that truck.
Sure.
And when you see an accident that involves an 80,000 pound commercial motor vehicle, the damage can be catastrophic.
It can be just due to the weight and velocity, and it just starts crushing anything in its path if it can't get stopped.
And so when a crash like that occurs, you're getting a phone call from either the lawyer for the plaintiff or the defendant. What type of things are you looking for when you get called to investigate a crash like that?
Well, when I get called on a crash like that the crash has just occurred, you want to get to the scene as soon as possible. You want to photograph, record all the evidence that you can because there's so much evidence that you're looking at. You're going to look over this evidence time and time again. You want to record the roadway, any marks from the roadway. You want to record anything damage to the vehicles. You want to look at the type of equipment in each vehicle. You want to look and see if there's anything in the vehicles that may have caused a distraction, such as, phones, tablets, things of that nature. So you want to gain as much information as you can because you're going to be looking at this over a period of time.
And over the years you've been doing this, is there any cases that stand out to you that you want to talk about that kind of stuck with you?
Well, there's so many. Right now I've investigated probably somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 serious crashes. And some of them are just so catastrophic they're heartbreaking on what happens because you're usually have people involved with injuries or even death. So unfortunately, that's just part of it when you're operating on the highway system and why you have to be safe. As far as commercial motor vehicles, I've looked at those where say a crash had problems. One where I can think of off the top of my head where the commercial motor vehicle had bad brakes on it. They knew it had bad brakes, but they still used it. The commercial motor vehicle struck a motorcyclist. The motorcyclist did not die from his injuries. However, he did have to have life care after this crash. So it was catastrophic. And that would get into the brake system. And through our investigation, we discovered that the semi had inadequate brakes. Then I see where people have not been trained, and we look at the crash, and you can just tell how the operator was operating, that they could not operate safely. I had another one up there on 4064 in the St. Louis area where a background investigation was not conducted on the driver, and the driver was a insulin-taking diabetic and had a medical history. And he was unqualified to drive. However, he found a physician and did not tell them about his diabetic history and did not tell the trucking company about the diabetic history. However, the trucking company did not do the investigation as required, and the driver ended up blacking out in heavy as he approached heavy stop traffic. Crashed into numerous vehicles and killed several people.
Yeah, these are, as you mentioned, 80,000-pound vehicles, and in each of these crashes you're describing, for whatever reason, the truck was unable to stop. I would imagine it takes a little while to bring an 80,000-pound vehicle to a stop, especially on the interstate.
Well, if you're looking at the interstate, it takes real close right at, in good weather, flat surface, dry highway, real close to 500 feet to get it stopped. There's several things that give you that distance. What you're going to look at, it's what they call in the accident reconstruction community human factors. And the driver has to perceive something to react to. So you have that time, and then you have a time of them to begin to react, and that's called perception and reaction time.
Right.
And usually, and this can really vary, you have to look at each situation differently, but on average it's 1.5 to 2 seconds. So if you're traveling that 102 feet a second in 2 seconds, the truck's already traveled 200 feet before the driver even begins to be able to brake the vehicle or swerve the vehicle, whatever they need to do. And then once the driver starts braking, trucks are different than cars. Most have what they call an air brake system, where the cars or light trucks have a hydraulic system. And there's a lag in the brake system on the trucks. It's called brake lag, where it can take a half a second or more once the driver hits the brakes before the brakes start working.
Oh, jeez.
So you can easily go another 50 feet when you're braking before anything even begins to happen.
Wow.
So you have that type of thing. And then the distance that it takes to stop after you begin braking. So you have to combine all those different things. That's why you get this great distance of almost 2 football fields.
Wow.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, so I've heard it said truck drivers have to know what's going on around them and ahead of them for a certain number of feet. And I can't remember exactly how far that is, but it's like 1,000 feet or something like that they need to know everything around them. It's their constant awareness factor.
Yes, on the highway, it will tell the truck driver, the commercial driver's manual, and there's a lot of training material out there for that driver to be looking 12 to 15 seconds ahead.
Okay.
So that's a long, long distance.
That could be 1,200 feet if he's going 70 miles an hour.
Easily.
Yeah.
Yes.
In another way, that trucks are different than passenger vehicles, which require drivers to be trained, is when they break down or they pull off to the side of the highway, there's regulations and rules that they have to follow when they pull off on the side of the highway, that they're required to put out lights or flares or markings so people can see them. And why is that?
Well, it's a safety thing for the operation of a highway. The shoulder of a highway is designed for disabled vehicles and for emergency maneuvers of vehicles that are operating on the highway. So if you stop a large vehicle on the highway, most of the shoulders are 10 feet wide. Well, the commercial motor vehicle is 8.5 feet wide. So you're barely out of the travel lane when you're on the shoulder. So you don't want to stop on the shoulder unless it's an emergency. If you do have to stop, the driver is required to immediately put on their flashers. And then if they're there for over 10 minutes, they have to set out triangles, these orange reflective triangles. And they have to be set out from 10 feet all the way back to 500 feet, depending upon the terrain of the roadway, to alert motorists that they are there on the roadway, and also it's a disabled vehicle.
And you mentioned those are reflective. One of the changes I've seen to trucks since I was a kid is a lot of them have this tape on the back of them that they didn't have when I was growing up. What is the purpose of that?
It's several different things to identify the truck itself, to identify the width of the truck, the red and white reflective tape. On a what you call a van or a reefer, a box-type trailer, you'll see white reflective taping at the upper corners of the truck. And it not only identifies the truck, but it gives you a visual distance and what they call a looming distance as you're approaching the vehicle. And there's human identifiers by looking at a vehicle with that pattern. So the Department of Transportation requires that on all commercial motor vehicles now.
Because that actually at night it kind of sends the light signal back to the approaching driver, right?
It does, yes.
And that's what alerts them, hey, this truck isn't moving, or maybe is moving very slowly, or I'm closing this distance fast.
All of those, you're correct. Yes.
And it's a nice safety measure.
And what I read and what I've seen and discussed with people that the reason why all these safety factors are important is because when you, as a passenger vehicle, hit the back end of an 18-wheeler, it's catastrophic versus you hitting another vehicle, another passenger vehicle. So all these safety measures are important because if you don't see the vehicle, you're not aware the vehicle stopped on the side of the roadway, if you hit that 18-wheeler, it's more likely catastrophic injuries.
It usually is. I've worked numerous accidents where passenger vehicles have struck a commercial motor vehicle, or a commercial motor vehicle striking another commercial motor vehicle. And it's usually catastrophic.
And all these safety measures are, like you said, to bring awareness, attention that there's something ahead of you. Be on the lookout for it.
That's right. And these regulations that we're talking about is put in place by a federal agency called the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And their mission statement is to reduce accidents, injuries, and fatalities on the highway. That's their written mission statement. And that's why these regulations are in place.
Yeah. A couple of the examples you brought up involving failure to do a background check or failure to catch brakes. When is that stuff supposed to be caught by the when does a driver identify those issues?
The driver has to do before they operate their vehicle for the first time that day. And when I say day, it's not necessarily morning. Just when they first start using that vehicle, it could be in the evening. They have to do what's called a pre-trip inspection, where they have to examine the brakes, the lights, make sure the brake system is functional, steering. There's just tires. Make sure there's not any oil or grease leaks that would affect their braking or fires, things of that nature. Yeah,
and ideally catching all of that then prior to leaving and being on the road to ensure you've got a safe vehicle.
That's it, yes. Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of regulations. We obviously can't get to them all, but we thank Bill Hampton for joining us today. That's going to do it for Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we ask you to take a second look at the world of personal injury litigation. Apologies to Sam Alito. We ran out of time. We'll see you back next week. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn. If you have questions and need answers, contact Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolves today. Just go to cbpw-law.com. See you next week for Tell Me I Have a Case. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and shouldn't be based solely on advertisements.